national spotlight.
You'll find us here with our weapon of choice, the rosary. So thank you, Mr. President. We are all praying for you.
A Catholic religious sister was among the speakers on the third night of the Republican National Convention. We have a recap and also examine President Donald Trump's outreach to Catholic voters. Seeking answers. Lawmakers want to know more about whether coronavirus funds went to Planned Parenthood. And appeal to the Vatican, why Pope Francis received a letter from a group of students from South Korea. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, August 27th, 2020. Good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable reporting from the White House. As President Donald Trump prepares to accept the Republican Party's nomination tonight, last night, Vice President Mike Pence made an impassioned case for re-election.
President Trump has stood without apology for the sanctity of human life every day of this administration. Joe Biden, he supports taxpayer funding of abortion right up to the moment of birth. When you consider their agenda, it's clear. Joe Biden would be nothing more than a Trojan horse for the radical left.
Well, the vice president gave his remarks from Fort McHenry in Maryland, the site of the 1812 battle that inspired the Star-Spangled Banner. The vice president wasn't the only speaker to point out the Democratic Party's pro-abortion positions.
We must fight against a legislative agenda that supports and even celebrates destroying life in the womb. Keep in mind, the laws we create define how we see our humanity. And we must ask ourselves, what are we saying when we go into a womb and snuff out an innocent, powerless, voiceless life?
Sister Dee Dee Byrne, a medical doctor, called the Biden-Harris ticket, quote, the most anti-life presidential ticket ever, end quote. And joining me now here at the White House is Philip Crowther, international affiliate reporter for the Associated Press. Philip, great to see you here in person.
Great to see you in person. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
Absolutely. Same here. So last night, the vice president's speech came amid all the crises that we have going on in the country right now. Did he address it, and what did he have to say?
Well, he did address all of them, not necessarily in the way that Democrats would have liked him to do so. The hurricane, yes, he mentioned it off the top. The coronavirus, yes, he did as well. Maybe it was a bit of a positive view of it. He again promised that there would be a vaccine at the end of the year, and of course praised the president's handling of the coronavirus outbreak. That's been one of the big themes during this Republican convention, of course. And then, of course, the thorny issue of the day, racial injustice, police brutality. Yes, the vice president did talk about it, but again, not necessarily the words that at least Democrats would have expected. His was a law and order message during a law and order night during the convention, and his message was a stark one. He basically said, you're not going to be safe in Joe Biden's America.
Phil, what was his overall message?
Well, there was all sorts there, really, from the vice president. First of all, a dark message of what the United States might look like under former Vice President Joe Biden. That, again, has been a theme during this convention, of course. He also tends to, and most speakers do during this convention, they tend to look back at a time before the coronavirus outbreak as to how good it was, essentially, how well the economy was doing. And I think what Republicans' message is, and the vice president's was as well yesterday, was if you want those times back, we are the only ones who can get it back for you. That's why this new slogan, if you will, that has come up, Make America Great Again, is the one that the vice president used again. He's basically saying, look, if you want that back, we're your choice. He had another job on his hands yesterday, which was to portray the president in as positive a light as possible. And we heard that from many speakers. They were trying to paint a more polished picture of the president behind the scenes, the man that we don't see on camera, even though, of course, we do see quite a lot of him on camera.
Yeah, we also heard from Kellyanne Conway, who we know just announced that she is stepping down for her position as counselor to the president. She was really key in that 2016 election. What did she have to say?
Well, interestingly enough, you don't hear this that much, but she did portray the president as a bit of a feminist. And we heard from a lot of female speakers, actually, on night 3 of the Republican convention. That's obviously not a coincidence. This is a political event. It's about attracting as many voters as you can. And the Republican Party and the Trump campaign know that there are some voters that might be slipping away among women more than anywhere. And so So it's about attracting women back to the party and back to the Trump-Pence ticket as much as possible. I think that was one of the main messages from Kellyanne Conway. Probably the last time we'll see her speak in public for a while.
And finally, looking ahead tonight, the big show. The president is speaking right here at the White House. What are we expecting him to say?
I think you're right to mention the word show, because I was already going to say, it's going to be a show more than anything. With this president, you never really know what you're going to get, but I think what we've also learned over the almost 4 years of his presidency is he's not going to tone it down. It's going to be spectacular, probably. We don't know exactly, what else is organized apart from just the speech, but it's going to be aggressive. That much we know. It's going to be aggressive toward the former Vice President Joe Biden. It's going to be the presentation of a very stark choice for Americans between the left and the right, essentially. And I think we'll hear a lot about what has been going on in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and anywhere else there might have been protests and riots over the last few months. I think the president will be talking about those at length. It's been a theme during this Republican convention that Republicans are the ones who can bring law and order, and the Democrats are the ones that might bring that kind of upheaval. Of course, that's not necessarily the case, but that is the message from the president. That's a stark choice between those two parties and those two candidates.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much, Phil. We'll see what happens tonight.
Good to be with you.
Appreciate you coming on. President Donald Trump and his opponent Joe Biden have one thing in common. They both need Catholic votes in order to win. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports.
Tracy, a poll conducted earlier this year by EWTN News and Real Clear Opinion Research shows that 53% of American Catholics plan to vote for President Trump or are open to the possibility.
And if there was one message you wanted to say to our viewers, what would it be right now?
Well, I think anybody having to do with, frankly, religion, but certainly the Catholic Church, you have to be with President Trump.
President Donald Trump appealed to Catholic voters during a recent interview on EWTN News Nightly. But will it be enough to convince the faithful to give him 4 more years in the Oval Office? The Trump campaign says,
to the faithful, the Catholics and others that are concerned, you have to activate. This is an election where maybe more than ever, you've got to be a part of answering the questions, being a part of the solution, getting involved.
And just last night, one RNC speaker made this plea to viewers.
As a physician, I can say without hesitation, life begins at conception. While what I have to say may be difficult for some to hear, I am saying it because I'm not just pro-life, I'm pro-eternal life, and I want all of us to end up in heaven together someday.
But nothing is cut and dry in politics.
The Catholic vote is something of an unpredictable block. In the polls, white Catholics support the president overwhelmingly, but overall, Catholics are split, and they have been for some time.
Catholic University of America theologian Chad Pecknold told me Catholic voters wrestle with many issues, which in his words leaves them, quote, politically homeless. Still, he says,
I think for many Catholics that the right to life is so fundamental that if you don't get that right, you're not going to get any other human right.
Chad Pecknold also says this has been a good week for President Trump, that the polls are reflecting that. He expects a close race come November, but says it would be a fool's errand to try to predict a winner. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Joining me now on Skype to talk more about this is Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief for Real Clear Politics. Carl, welcome back. So good to see you. So let's talk about the Catholic vote. How important will it be to President Trump's reelection?
Well, he about split the Catholic vote with Hillary Clinton last time. It's difficult to know exactly, but it was pretty close. 23% of the voters are going to be Roman Catholic, and he's got to do at least as well as he did last time, and he's running against a Democrat who's a Roman Catholic, so he's got his work cut out for him.
Yeah, we know from our earlier polling that it will actually be the active Catholics that will make the difference. 59% of active Catholics polled said they plan to vote for President Trump in 2020, and another 8% said there is a good chance that they would vote for him. How significant do you think that will be as we get closer to the election? Well,
we're going to do another poll with EWTN, and we'll know more soon. There's a Pew poll that was done in July. It shows the same thing. It's close, but right now, if the election were held today, Donald Trump would get slightly more of the Catholic vote than Joe Biden. As to your point, these very energized Catholics, the Catholics who go to Mass once a week, who believe, who really are committed to their parish and to their faith. They're still strongly for President Trump, and he knows this. And you noticed at the convention there were appeals to the faithful.
Carl, among Catholic voters at this point, what's your view of the state of the race?
Well, I thought Joe Biden would get more of a bounce with Catholic voters from being Catholic. He hasn't. He's only the fourth Catholic nominee in our history, all Democrats: Al Smith, John Kennedy, John Kerry, and now Biden, and it hasn't helped him. So this race is about where it was before, and where the energy is in the Catholic vote are the truly committed, who also tend to be the most pro-President Trump. So he's got to get out his base. He's got to energize these people. He's got to, between now and November, basically hold his lead with them and energize them to get to the polls.
All right, Carl, appreciate you coming on. Appreciate your time. Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief for Real Clear Politics. Thanks so much for your analysis.
Anytime.
Catholics have voted for the winner in the last 9 out of the past 10 presidential elections. Mercedes Schlapp, Senior Advisor for Strategic Communications for the 2020 Trump campaign, joins me now on Skype. Mercedes, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for your time today. As you know, the Catholic vote was important to the president's election back in 2016. What are you doing now to retain and also to expand the Catholic vote?
Well, the Catholic vote is a priority for this campaign. We launched our Catholics for Trump coalition that is going strong in many of these targeted states. And our goal is obviously to share the president's message. As we know, last night was so significant with Sister Didi, as well as Abby Johnson, who talked about the horrors of the Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, most anti-pro-life presidential ticket that we've seen in our lifetime. So Sister Didi was, I think, so inspirational for so many of us, someone who is serves the underprivileged, has been such a voice for the unborn, and talking about the need to reelect President Trump because he is the most pro-life president that we've seen in our lifetime.
Yeah, we've certainly heard strong focus on pro-life messages this week. How do you think that's resonating with voters, and how big of a role do you think that messaging is going to play as we get closer to the election?
Look, I think that there's so many of these different areas that the president is focused on. Obviously, his appointments of constitutional judges to the court has been critical. His 2 Supreme Court justices, as well as we know, Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch, were such significant picks. And we know that the Supreme Court is in a very delicate balance, and it's why we need a president like President Donald Trump, who understands that we need strict constitutionalists on the Supreme Court, on the federal bench. And I think that's going to be one of his legacies for generations to come. As well as, obviously, the president has been a staunch supporter of religious liberties and on working on ending persecution of Christians abroad as well. So for the president, he really has focused in not only domestically but abroad on how we can ensure that we can protect our religious liberties, something that we know that Joe Biden and Kamala will not protect. And so I think the president has such a strong record, and we share that with our fellow Catholics. You know, obviously my Catholic faith is very important to me and my family, and being able to share that with Catholic voters who are deciding this November who should lead in the next 4 years, it's very clear that Donald Trump has been the supporter of those who are a people of faith, those who believe and are staunch supporters of the unborn and being a voice for the unborn. And really the other side has gone so far left that it would be very destructive for all the progress we've made in the pro-life movement.
Mercedes, we have less than about a minute left, but I want to ask you this quickly. Let's talk about women and Hispanic voters. How is the campaign speaking to them?
Well, we have this big pink Women for Trump bus. I've been on it, going to different targeted states. What I'm seeing on the ground is great enthusiasm by women, many of them running these field offices, many of them volunteers, making phone calls, knocking on doors. We're also doing the same thing with the Latinos for Trump. We have a very strong coalition there, in addition to Black Voices for Trump. And what we are seeing is huge enthusiasm for this president in the targeted states. We are going to keep talking about the president's strong record in helping women, in helping minorities achieve their goals. We've seen more opportunities for these groups than we've seen under when Biden was in power and his administration. Under Biden, we saw the weakest recovery since the Great Depression. Here, what you have with the president is someone who understands how to build a strong economy, how to ensure people can get back to work, and continue to combat the coronavirus, which we know has impacted all of our lives.
Mercedes, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Mercedes Schlapp, Senior Advisor for Strategic Communications. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Coming up, the latest on Hurricane Laura as it makes landfall in the United States. From the 1973 Roe versus Wade ruling up through 2018, a bipartisan pro-life majority in the U.S. House of Representatives stood in the way of laws to expand legal abortion. 2 years ago, when Democrats won the majority in the House, that's shifted. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric?
Well, Tracy, it certainly did. You know, in the last election cycle, of the 30 Democrats who were voted into the House of Representatives, only one, Representative Ben McAdams of Utah, is pro-life. I sat down with a representative of Republican today of the caucus, pro-life caucus, about where are we today in protecting the lives of the unborn.
We need more pro-life people.
Congresswoman Debbie Lesko of Arizona is a member of the Pro-Life Caucus. Once strongly bipartisan, the group's numbers, especially its numbers of pro-life Democrats, are dwindling.
I'm really concerned here in Congress, with the Democrat-led U.S. Congress, that we can't get any of our pro-life legislation through. Republicans can't. In fact, the Democrats keep pushing through more pro-abortion legislation.
At last week's convention, Democrats reaffirmed their party's platform commitment to protect abortion by pledging to, quote, restore federal funding for Planned Parenthood, despite current restrictions put in place during President Trump's administration, which cut off a percentage of tax dollars for Planned Parenthood. The nation's largest abortion provider still received 37% of its budget from government reimbursements and grants, according to their last annual report. In a video by the Center for Medical Progress, Planned Parenthood officials are seen testifying under oath to abortion procedures designed to, quote, harvest unusable body parts for sale and experimentation.
Now we see from these videos that they actually choose which part of a little baby to crush when they're doing the abortion so that they can save the organs.
Pro-life activist Lila Rose tweeted yesterday, quote, President Trump can defund Planned Parenthood by executive order, adding the hashtag defund Planned Parenthood.
I would support President Trump with an executive order to defund Planned Parenthood.
Congressman Lesko has sponsored legislation to force Planned Parenthood to pay back the $150 million that it's taken out of the PPP program. Congressman Lesko says to this day, she has heard that they have not paid back 1 cent. Tracy?
Correspondent Eric Rosales reporting from the Capitol Hill tonight. Thank you so much, Eric. On new details on the police shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin, investigators say a knife was found in his car. Meanwhile, a 17-year-old is arrested for killing 2 protesters as he tried to run from crowds. Tuesday night, however, last night was a lot more peaceful. Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers sent another 500 members of the National Guard. They're also getting help from the FBI and U.S. Marshals. Hurricane Laura slammed the Louisiana coast as a Category 4 storm overnight. It has been downgraded, but high winds and flooding are expected to continue. Hundreds of thousands are without power, and a 14-year-old girl is reported killed when a tree hit her home. The storm is predicted to bring more heavy rains to the Ohio River Valley and the Northeast this weekend. Up next, how Pope Francis may help pro-lifers in South Korea. A judge in New Zealand today sentenced a white supremacist to life in prison for the slaughter last year of 51 people at mosques. The Prime Minister in neighboring Australia says the world should never hear from the gunman again.
All Australians were and remain horrified and devastated by his despicable terrorist act. New Zealand is family to us in Australia. Today, we send our love across the ditch.
Speaking to the Australian Parliament, Morrison paid tribute to the Muslim communities in both Australia and New Zealand. It is the first time the maximum available sentence has been imposed in New Zealand. A group of pro-life students from South Korea has sent a letter to Pope Francis. The students are asking for the Holy Father's help as officials in Seoul are determining the future of the country's abortion laws. The students also met with Archbishop Alfred Srireb, Apostolic Nuncio to Korea, who promised their message would be delivered to the Pope this week. The Supreme Court is giving South Korea's National Assembly until the end of the year to revise the abortion law. Earlier today, I spoke to our Rome bureau for more details. Joining us now from Rome is Courtney Mares, Rome correspondent for Catholic News Agency, who has been following this story. Courtney, welcome back. Great to see you. So tell us about the current abortion law in South Korea, and why did the Supreme Court there call for a revision?
The South Korean law had officially banned abortion with criminal penalties, except in the cases of rape, incest, and a few other exceptions, until the Supreme Court decision in April 2019 found it to be unconstitutional. Now, it is important to note that despite this law, abortion was known to be common in Korea and the criminal penalties rarely enforced, with hundreds of thousands taking place in the past decade. Pope Francis brought attention to this fact when he visited an abortion cemetery and a cemetery for aborted babies during his apostolic visit to Korea in 2014. The Supreme Court has given South Korea's National Assembly until the end of this year to revise the current law. And pro-life advocates are warning right now that unless additional legislation is passed, the current abortion law will be completely abolished, leaving no restrictions on abortion in South Korea.
Courtney, what has the Catholic Church's response been?
I spoke this week to the Secretary General for the Archdiocese of Seoul's Committee for Life, Father Hugo Park, and he told me that the Church is advocating for legislation to address the needs of pregnant mothers. The Archdiocese is currently calling for the revised law to include mandatory counseling for women who are considering abortion, financial support requirements for biological fathers, and the legal ability for women to deliver anonymously. He also told me that that this week the delegation for Korean bishops met with President Moon Jae-in last Friday and gave him a recommendation of pro-life policies that could be put into place. The president of South Korea is Catholic, but he has yet to take a stand on the abortion law.
Courtney, can you talk about the pro-life movement in South Korea and tell us, is it strong there?
While currently facing a lot of opposition, South Korea's pro-life movement has mobilized, especially after the Constitutional Court's ruling. There has been a protester present in front of South Korean government offices for more than 500 days, despite the coronavirus pandemic, since the 2019 Supreme Court decision. There is also a virtual March for Life in the works. Scheduled for next week on September 5th, participants in the South Korean March for Life will each walk 2 kilometers on their own before joining together online to discuss the abortion law and proposed regulations.
Well, Courtney, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you coming on. Courtney Mares, Rome correspondent for Catholic News Agency. Thanks again, Courtney.
Thank you, Tracy.
And finally tonight, today is the feast of St. Monica, and there was a surprise visitor to a church where the saint is buried. Pope Francis stopped by the Basilica of St. Augustine to honor St. Monica, who prayed constantly for her son's conversion. The feast of St. Augustine, who is one of the giants of the Catholic faith, is tomorrow. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable at the White House. We leave you tonight with more of Sister Dee Dee Burns' speech last night at the Republican National Convention. Good night and God bless.
And while we tend to think of the marginalized as living beyond our borders, the truth is the largest marginalized group in the world can be found here in the United States. They are the unborn. As Christians, we first met Jesus as a stirring embryo in the womb of an unwed mother and saw him born 9 months later in the poverty of the cave. It's no coincidence that Jesus stood up for what was just and was ultimately crucified because what he said wasn't politically correct or fashionable. As followers of Christ, we are called to stand up for life against the politically correct or fashionable of today. We must fight against a legislative agenda that supports and even celebrates destroying life in the womb. Keep in mind, the laws we create define how we see our humanity. And we must ask ourselves, what are we saying when we go into a womb and snuff out an innocent, powerless, voiceless life?